I'm so glad to see all of you. Welcome to the Movement Café, where our topic for this month is Young People's Ministries. My name is Reverend Rashenda Fairhurst, and I get the pleasure of sort of guiding us through the process today. And I'm part of a three-person team, Kathy and Don Lewis, who is it's just lovely to work together for sure. Our topic, as I said, is young people's ministries. And one of the things that we do in the Movement Cafe, this is kind of how it works. We sort of join together and I offer a welcome. And we are kind to each other. And we really focus on listening in, leaning in, learning about each other, learning about what's going on in United Methodism, which of course sort of echoes what's going on in the faith community in general. So unfortunately, I don't have an opportunity to ask all of you to introduce yourselves, but we have chat. So if you are comfortable with that, let us know where you are, what your conference is. You can let us know what your space is, what space you work in when it comes to creation justice, or if you don't work in that space and wish to, how that's working for you in your life. And so the United Methodist Creation Justice Movement Cafe, we love long names in faith communities, is part of the United Methodist Creation Justice Movement. And so I want to turn it over a few minutes to Kathy Velasquez Eberhardt, and she is going to kind of let us know, what is this movement? What is this amazing thing that's been happening in Methodism? So go ahead, Kathy.
Hi, good day, everybody. I'm so grateful you're joining us. We apologize for the technical issues if you found a locked Zoom at one point, but we've figured that out. What I am grateful for this space as the Movement Cafe, a place for us to come together across distance, across our conferences, across our passions, to talk about ways that the United Methodist Church, the whole denomination in all of its different ways, can do more to work together for creation justice. This movement began really only a few years ago, early 2020, with officially, but the United Methodist Church has a really long history of working on creation justice and creation care and environmental justice issues. As folks found each other at Earthkeeper trainings, at creation care conferences and summits, there was a recognition that with the urgency of the planet, the urgency of climate change and environmental destruction and injustices, that more needed to be done, that we could coordinate our efforts better, that we could find and create spaces to imagine more work together. So that is what emerged. And out of that, we have several key work teams, a coordinating team that meets a couple of times a month. We have a strong communications team that's developed a variety of communications channels, a monthly newsletter, a website, and this cafe space, all of which enable us to learn what each other is doing. We have a very active annual conference organizing team that is working on resolutions for annual conference and for general conference. And we have a worship team that's developed materials for season of creation and the period in the spring around Earth Day, and other teams. And so there's actually a couple of new budding teams, one on solar, one on general conference preparations, one on divestment. I'm probably missing something, green teams, and there can be more. And so if you have a passion that really hasn't been mentioned, then please reach out. We can get a group started. I know there are others that are interested in this work too. So we're grateful for you to be here with us today for this conversation. We're always looking for ways to engage with the different parts of the church, including our young adults, and the ways that we can do that. And so that's what the focus of this conversation will be today. And maybe there's the opportunity to work together to create a new group that is specifically about that. So we'll just see where all this goes. I think, Rashenda, I will stop there, but please reach out if there are ever any questions or ideas. And I think that is also my nutshell on what this cafe is intended to be. So I'll just turn it back to you, Rashenda, to take the next steps.
Wonderful. That's wonderful. So yes, I find this movement to be a good, nourishing, and very friendly space. That's one of the joys of organizing is um, people want to see you, and they really love to share their work, and you kind of end up working alongside together, and it's just a really satisfying way to meet the challenge that we face. The climate justice challenges that we face are significant, but more significant is the way that human beings come together, especially under God, to do this kind of work. So I'm really glad we're all here. I want to do a few introductions, and they'll have a chance to, of course, fill in anything that I miss. And of course, I just to remind everyone that Kathy Velasquez Everhart is a founding member of the movement, and she is a key organizer and a commissioned earthkeeper, and has also worked with Interfaith Power and Light in Minnesota as a member of the board, and many other things. So this is near and dear to her heart. I want to introduce also Chris Wilterdink, and Chris is the executive director of Congregational Vitality and Intentional Discipleship and the director of Young People's Ministries. Chris's roles in ministry were based at the local church for more than 12 years, and he has written several books, so definitely look him up as an author. And he has currently an ebook series, Crash Courses in Youth Ministry. And so that is really, we're so glad we're here, and we're so glad for his wealth of knowledge. I also want to introduce William H. Morris. So he is a climate activist. He has degrees in environmental science with emphasis on restoration and watershed management. He's a faith organizer with GreenFaith, working on the People versus Fossil Fuels campaign. He also works with Young Evangelicals for Climate Action as an organizer and on the steering committee. He works with, as a volunteer, Climate Reality Project, founder and chair of the Los Angeles chapter for Faith-Based Communities Committee, sitting on the steering committee for California Interfaith Power and Light, founder and chair of the Creation Justice Committee at his local church, Faith United Methodist Church, and part of the leadership team of Faith for Future and Climate Faith Future, where I am just always so thrilled to get to see him. So he's worked internationally, and he's been kind of the star of the show a couple of times, interviewed in Rolling Stone and ABC and BBC. And so we're glad he's here. So when I said, William, will you interested? I was just so glad when he said yes. And also here with us are two earth keepers that I'm very excited to introduce, Reverend Sherry Smith and Taylor Smith. And Reverend Sherry Smith and Taylor Smith are here to share about the Gen Z perspectives. What does it mean to be a young person in the United Methodist Church, and where are there places that they are making a difference and stepping in to say this work needs to be done? And so really, really glad for all of them to be here. So what we're going to do is Chris, are you almost ready? I'm actually going to turn it right over to Chris, and then we're going to move through our program, and then we're going to do breakout rooms. Please stay for those. Those are always amazing. And yeah, and then we'll be rolling, and you'll go away nourished and with a lot more under your belt. So go ahead, Chris.
All right, Rashenda, thank you so very much. And I'm just incredibly thankful to be a part of this gathering today, and can't wait to get out of the way so that we can hear William and Sherry and Taylor's amazing parts of our time together today. I do have some slides that I will start to share. And before I start my slideshow, I'll just reiterate who I am. My name is Chris. My pronouns are he, him, and I am at Discipleship Ministries of the United Methodist Church. And really everything that we do at Discipleship Ministries as one of the general agencies of the United Methodist Church is to support and challenge the church in its discipleship. And when this invitation came related to creation care, creation justice, it seemed like a natural place, because that's an area that young people certainly want to be able to engage with as much as the rest of the church wants to engage with it as well. And you're going to see that young people, just like any other disciple that's out there, needs to be both supported and challenged as we figure out the next right steps and where we would end up liking to put our energy. All of that said, we're going to go to history class for a little bit during the 15 minutes that I have. So we're going to start with history. And the reason I want to do that in terms of framing our conversation is just to remind everyone how the United Methodist movement was really grounded in the young adult age range as it came to be, and as it gained traction. It was really a movement driven by young people, and needing to figure out ways that we can kind of recapture that idea of movement as opposed to institution, I think is a really big deal. So we're going to go to history class for a little bit. And then I'll provide a few observations and then get out of the way for William and Sherry and Taylor before we do our breakouts. But again, it's just incredible to be with everybody today. As soon as I start screen sharing, I do lose the ability to, I think, see everybody else on the Zoom or to interact with the chat. So Rashenda and Kathy, if there's anything I need to know, just jump in and interrupt me. My background is as an English teacher, and I'm totally used to being interrupted all the time because I have a 7th grader and a 4th grader at home that don't care if I'm talking to anybody with any kind of purpose. They just jump in with whatever they want. So totally fine to jump in whenever you need. All right, here we go. Screen share time. All righty. The agency that I work for, Discipleship Ministries. You can find all of our resources at umcdiscipleship.org. And the website that I keep up specifically for young people in the denomination is umcyoungpeople.org. Feel free to visit those, any and all of those at your own time. So, like I said, we're going to history class for a little bit in the next 12 minutes, and it's going to be a very, very brief overview of what our distinctive United Methodist heritage and identity looks like, why that's important as we think about connecting with young people today, and a little bit about how that relates to our desire to be part of climate justice conversations. The seeds for where I'm going to start this conversation are during the English Reformation, okay? The English Reformation happened when King Henry VIII, that's a typo on the bottom, it's not Henry VII, it's Henry VIII, in the 1500s, wants to get a divorce from his wife because he's having problems producing male heirs. The Pope will not grant him permission to get a divorce, and so he says, you know what? I'm going to become my own pope, and we're going to start our own church. So the Church of England gets formed by King Henry VIII. And in that process, really kicks off a sort of family tree that goes along with part of the Protestant Reformation. By most of the Middle Ages, the church had become quite corrupt throughout Europe, and many were seeking to create reforms within the Catholic Church. In the second decade of the 16th century, really the Protestant Reformation broke out all across Europe, and often these were along national lines as well, okay? So the home of Lutherans ended up becoming most of Germany. We're specifically focusing on the English Reformation taking place in the bottom half of England itself. That Reformation formed what we would call today the Anglican Church or the English Church. The Church of England in the United States is known as the Episcopal Church. And often we see a lot of similarities between United Methodism or Methodist approaches to faith and things that you would find in the Episcopal Church, because they both spring out of what happened in the English Reformation itself. When Henry VIII does this, right, it makes this incredible divide in England between Catholics and Protestants, and I'm probably saying a lot of things that you all would be very familiar with already, but just as a reminder, if there was a Catholic monarch on the throne, Protestants were in big trouble, right? You could be killed if you were too excited or exuberant about your Protestant faith with a Catholic on the throne. Vice versa, if there's a Protestant who's on the throne, the Catholics become endangered and in trouble. And it kind of leads to this evolution where a third option emerges that's not Catholic and it's not Protestant, but it's kind of in between, and it's got elements of both. And Methodism carries that history as a part of its movement. By the 18th century, right, so we're talking for 200 or 300 years now post the English Reformation, there's basically 200 consecutive years of religious wars based on who is on the throne of England, and everybody gets tired of religious zeal. In part because, again, if you were too zealous, you got yourself in trouble. If you were too excited or public about your faith, it put you too far in one camp or the other, and ended up leading to persecution and personal danger. And therefore, there was kind of this subdued effect on how people interacted with the church itself and how they expressed their faith in public. The church was not a passionate place. The church was not a place that necessarily engaged in doing a lot of social good at the time. And that is the world that the Wesleys end up being born into, okay? In the early 1700s, the church is ignoring significant social ills that are in place in England at the time. Child labor is on the rise because the Industrial Revolution has gotten big. Distilled alcohol has increased rates of alcoholism. Even in a culture where the fermentation and brewing of beer was something that actually purified water and allowed people to stay hydrated, this newer version of distilled alcohol with higher alcoholic percentages really was causing some issues across the culture itself. Tremendous poverty and uneven distribution of wealth was a huge issue. And one of the side effects of that was a significant amount of the population that was in debtor's prison. There was also, of course, slavery going on in the early 1700s that was driving a lot of economic disparity, not only in England, but across the world as well. And the Church of England at the time was not addressing any of these social justice issues, nor would they have been addressing much related to climate change or industrialization, in part because that was so new, but also in part, again, because this sort of passionate social voice had not been amplified in the 200 years prior because of the effects of the English Reformation. All right, John and Charles Wesley get born into this environment. Yes, the Wesleys are pastors' kids. You know the stereotypes that are out there about pastors' kids. They often go one way or the other. I'm a pastor's kid myself, so we can blame the whole system for who I've become. That's okay. Charles ends up studying at Oxford, and John was a student there as well. And John gets invited back to be a fellow teaching at Oxford, right? He was offered a fellowship position where he would mentor and teach younger students who would come and study at the colleges in Oxford. And he was allowed to do so until he was married. Fun fact, I'm great on trivia teams. The reason it's called a bachelor's degree is because these fellows were allowed to teach until they were married, right? So you had a mentor who was a bachelor. And that was the bachelor's degrees. So Charles is at Oxford and kind of gets his faith reawoken by connecting with different young adults, different youth and young adults who are at different colleges in Oxford itself. The University of Oxford is made up of a ton of different colleges. If you were to look at going on a Wesley pilgrimage tour of some kind, actually the fact that Ken Sloan is on this call, he's our staff person that's helping to lead the Discipleship Ministries Wesley pilgrimage to England this coming summer. And Oxford is one of the steps that's on there. If you happen to be in Oxford, you would find out that there are dozens and dozens of different colleges that kind of combine to make this university and college town. Charles gets involved with creating something that ends up being called the Holy Club with students from different colleges around Oxford. Some of the more significant ones are a young man named William Morgan, who specifically was visiting debtors' prisons and started prison ministries as something that had never really been done before as part of faith outreach stuff. George Whitefield was huge in terms of community outreach and evangelism. And Charles actually invited his older brother John back and into this Holy Club to be a part of this sort of small accountability group. And John really brought the gifts of organization to the club itself, while Charles would process and be part of this accountability group and really did a great job of being able to put theology into song. One of the things that when we think about the founders of Methodism and the young adults that were kind of driving this early Holy Club and Methodist movement, it's really interesting to compare John's approach to things versus Charles's approach to things. Again, John had a very systemic and organizational mind. And I think that's very important as we think about how we approach social justice and creation justice efforts today, because it takes a significant amount of organizing work to be able to help people steer themselves in the same direction that they'd all like to carry. At the same time, John was very wordy and published a ton of sermons, right? But the last time I read a John Wesley sermon has to be years and years and years ago. The last time that I sung a Charles Wesley hymn would be much more recent. And so there's also a tremendous value in being able to express our theology through song, or our theology through chants as well, right? And so as I think about young people and the movements that are needed today, there's a genuine need to be able to make theology accessible and understandable for folks that don't have a theological background or are specializing in a wide variety of things that are outside of the theological sphere. All right, anyway. Out of the Holy Club comes the general rules where doing no harm and avoiding evil of every kind, doing good of every possible sort and as far as possible to all, and third, attending upon the ordinances of God. And those general rules have been adapted into what we now call the general rule of discipleship, where we want to witness to Jesus Christ in the world and to follow his teachings through acts of compassion, justice, worship, and devotion under the guidance of the Holy Spirit. There is a graphic that we use in covenant discipleship materials that kind of breaks down those ordinances of God into a quadrilateral of sorts, okay? I'm not going to go deep into this. If we want to talk about it more in the breakouts, we certainly can, or during question and answer time. But basically, if you were to look at the left-hand side of the slide, those are the things that the Holy Club said that you could do to kind of influence the growth of your faith on your own. Those are the personal works of mercy and the personal works of piety, things that you can do on your own. On the right-hand side are the public works of mercy and the public works of piety, okay? Those are the things that need to be done in community and need to be done together. There is a social element to Christianity that was very, very important to the early Methodists, and social elements of justice movements are equally as important for young people today. Without a social component to activism or a social component to the organizing that we try to do, often I think we're going to find most of our efforts to connect with young people are going to fall flat because we burn out when we're doing things on our own. We need support. We need a network. We need the shared energy that we do in public spaces and in a community to accomplish the good things that we want to do. The top half of that graphic is the works of mercy. Those are the things that we do to demonstrate our love for neighbor. The bottom half of that graphic, the works of piety, are those things that we do to continue to show our love and care for God. All right, continuing on into the Methodist ideas of social justice. Methodists have an extreme focus on the practical application of our faith. Living faith in the everyday world is genuinely important. And the early Methodists, the early young adults, were not about theological hair splitting. They were much more about understanding how what they were doing was forming them in faith. And so the doctrines that they created were in service of discipleship. They were serving others in order to be able to grow and transform themselves and transform the world. Early Methodists really got plugged in as social activists. Again, speaking to kind of the ills that were in and around England for not only the Church of England, but the world at large. England was an amazing case study in sort of social ills that needed to be addressed from a faith perspective at the time, because there were really very few social safety nets. And so the church at the time had sort of a corner on the market, if you will, of being able to do good and do some outreach. From the beginning, Methodists have been involved in social issues and concerns. We were the first denomination to write a social creed, and historically, we have been among the first to get involved in controversial social issues, okay? I realize that that is something that might sound very scary or difficult these days, because when you are one of the first through the wall, you tend to be the bloodiest, right? You get a little bit beat up because you are willing to take a strong position on something that is unjust. And I'm here to tell you that the social component of those things and the dynamics that go with being labeled as somebody that's taking a position related to justice really helps keep leadership and keep key people involved as addressing social issues go on. All right, personal religion leads to social service, and for young people, service might come first. The church does not have a corner on the market anymore in terms of doing social good. There's plenty of organizations that do incredible work, and we have the ability to partner with them and come alongside as opposed to reinventing the wheel. I think that's a big, big deal. All right, because I've just got a minute left or so, We've got an activist faith, not a passive faith, and Wesley was very opposed to what was known as quietism. If you're unfamiliar with the social principles, there is an entire section related to God's natural world that I would encourage everybody to become familiar with. Many young adults do not necessarily know the structure or the organization of the church, much less the rule book that we play by or our official stances. And so if you can do some education related to introducing those social disciplines and the book of discipline, it can actually do a lot of good to be able to hear what the United Methodist Church officially says in terms of how we care for creation. We can pull apart the paragraphs that we have related to creation justice and God's natural world in the breakout for sure. I realized that I talked quite a bit, and I'm really, really glad y'all hung in there with me. So I'm going to zip it for now. I will leave this last screen up until the transition time to our next speaker starts. Thanks, Rashenda.
So yes, this is so amazing because grounding us in the sort of sense of belonging and community that is literally sort of this intergenerationally woven into United Methodism. And Chris, I just loved how you really talked about the social connection with Methodism, the concern for social justice, deeply part of who we are, what we have inherited, and why, and how that creates and participates in our sense of belonging. So that's fantastic. Really appreciate that. So speaking of social justice, right? William, you've been working at this intersection yourself in a few different capacities, but on the ground. Do you want to not to say Chris hasn't been on the ground, that's not a thing. Chris has been on the ground, very much so, leading retreats and arm in arm with young people of the church. Chris, William, would you like to share a little about where you sit, what you see from your perspective?
Absolutely. Thanks, Rashenda. And thanks so much, Chris. That was super interesting. Loved the history, loved diving into stuff and just realizing this work didn't start with us and it's not going to end with us. We're part of a bigger movement. And I think that brings me a lot of peace when I get worried about things. I feel like, man, the weight is really on my shoulders. And I'm like, you know what? It's not all up to me. That's okay. And so that was really helpful. So I'm going to share my screen now and talk a little bit about my work with young people. And technically, I'm still a young person. I'm 27, so a lot of you are going to roll your eyes. But, when I'm out in the streets and I'm with folks who are middle school, elementary school age, leading marches and things like that, I certainly don't feel young then. And so Rashenda shared a little bit about me. I live just south of Los Angeles in a city called Torrance that has a refinery. It's actually down the street from my house, about a block from my high school. Because of that, I went on to get my degree in environmental science, and I currently work with young evangelicals for climate action, getting young Christians around the country to take action on the climate crisis, with California Interfaith Power and Light doing a lot of policy and advocacy work, and also with GreenFaith, which is a multi-faith climate justice organization. And so I'm just going to kind of really quickly go through some of what I've seen on how we engage youth and young adults. I know I'm breaking PowerPoint rules here. I'm putting way too much text on a slide, but I know it's being recorded, so you can pull this back up later and take a look at it. And so some of the young adult and youth engagement I do right now is some of it's theological. It's speaking and preaching at churches, to young adults, to college groups, tying in with what Chris said about knowing our history, knowing our beliefs, and what they entail. There's so much in there to caring for our earth and creation and each other. And we're really just tying in beliefs that these young people learned in church to our current context of our climate crisis. I help with youth and young adults leading green teams at their congregation. As part of the curriculums in school now, all the kids learn about climate change. It's not a question or a debate for them. It's something that is ingrained in them from the start, and they are very passionate and fiery and wanting to do something, and so giving them space at congregations to do that. We also help connect young people to their elected officials. Elected officials really want to hear from young people about their concerns, about what's going on, and they're always surprised how engaged young people can be in a good way about sharing what they want. And so we get folks used to that. So far we have like theology, leadership development, advocacy, and now to action. We help youth and young adults participate in climate marches. And so more of this getting outside of the walls of your church and into the street, living out our faith, and doing so in community. These climate marches are a great time of social interaction as well, where maybe at your congregation or your local congregations, you feel like there's not a ton of people, but you go to one of these marches and you see that, wow, there's a ton of people who turn out and who care and who are taking action. We also help youth and young adults lead panels and screenings and teach them how do you put on that kind of event at your congregation, getting speakers out and getting connected with them, screening documentaries that they watch and they care about. There's also campus ministry group engagement as well. There's a ton of campus ministries, and especially here in Southern California, there's a ton of colleges and universities, all of which have faith campus groups. And so engaging with them as well. And then one of the things at Young Evangelicals for Climate Action we do is we have a whole college fellows program where young Christians from around the country apply to this program, where we resource and educate and teach them, and they get to put on a project at their college or university. And so for them, it's really great to gain those skills. And so out of all that work, there's a lot going on. And so summarizing some of the major takeaways and themes, the first one is engaging young people on their terms and in their space, not just inviting them in to yours. Oftentimes for young people, they're not super comfortable going into a space they don't know, especially a place like a church if they're not familiar. And so getting out of our own spaces and going into theirs is a big deal. And Chris talked about this as well, but connecting our faith and belief with words and actions. We saw that in the history portion, that our faith is supposed to be an active faith. And young people really notice when it is not. The next thing is how are congregations supporting young people? Like what are their needs? And what do you think they need versus what do they think they need? Because those are two different things. And so oftentimes it's just, how do we create spaces for young people to grow, to try, to fail at things, to succeed? Just offering that space is a huge help. And what resources are available for young people? Are there ways to financially support them, to send them to some sort of training or conference to gain skills? Are there people the church is connected with who could talk to them? Anything to make it easier to get into doing more in this work. I know for me, that was a big part of it. Originally, I graduated college and for years wasn't working full time because I spent all my time volunteering doing climate justice work, but there weren't faith organizations or places I could go who could support me full time. It just didn't exist, and it made it really, really hard to continue to do the work. And so looking forward now, how are we able to support young people in that? And another one is young people and climate grief and anxiety. That is a huge, huge issue going on right now, where young people feel like they're scared of the future, that the best times have passed and it's downhill from here. And so do congregations have mental health resources? Is there a climate grief group that could be created or joined? Is super important. And the next thing is young people want to be involved at different levels. They want to be involved locally, like, hey, what's going on in my congregation? But also what's going on a bigger scale. You know, what is our conference doing? What's going on in our state? What's happening in our country? And even beyond that. And so that has been super important, getting young people involved at all these different levels. And then one thing for young people too is they know, we need to support those who are most affected. And so young people are really looking to partner and join with frontline groups who are really affected by the climate crisis or fossil fuel infrastructure, things like that. And the last one is just letting young people lead, like letting them try, letting them fail. Like I said earlier, there's so much in that, just offering that space. And so I'm coming up on time. I think I have a couple minutes. Okay. And so I always want to end on this. This is coming from Pew Research Center. And there's two graphs here, and the one on the left shows the rise of religious nuns. And so that is people who are not religiously affiliated at all. And so you can see there's a few lines here, and at the top, it shows the number of people who consider themselves Christian over time from the 70s until now, and it's decreased from 90% to 63%. And those who consider themselves religiously unaffiliated has gone from about 5% to 29%. So a huge difference. And on this right side, we can see, digging into that a little more, that young people who were raised Christian, less of them are staying Christian as they get older, and less people who were raised religiously unaffiliated are becoming Christian now. And so I think oftentimes I hear a lot of critiques about young people, and things like this, they're pointed to and saying, what's wrong with young people? They're not, something's not right with them. And I think it's really just the opposite. This is really a symptom of what's going on, and it's really flipped. Is why don't young people feel like they want to be involved at church? Why don't they feel like it's a place where they can be, a place they can care, a place that is offering them support and help and love? And so I think as long as that continues, that gap of what young people need and what the church is offering, these will continue to grow. And so just always important to self-reflect on what's going on, what we can do, what we can offer. And I think honestly, the best thing we can do is just share space with young people, go to them, see what they're interested in and what's going on, and do a lot more listening compared to talking. And we need both. We need folks who are experienced in the movement to help guide and lead young people, but we don't need them to completely control them either. We can let young people be creative and try new things, and it is a different world. And so they have different needs than, even I did at that age. And so I think I'm about at time, so I'll end it there.
Wonderful. Yeah, William, it's an age-old question, right? Every generation, there's these generational tensions. This generation, there's so much more there's urgency there. There's something that's really sort of crushingly impacting young people and their sense of future. And so as I have a grandchild now, reflect on the past and the ways in which that I want to move maybe differently, do some repair, reconciliation. As a young person, my mind was solidly on the forward. And so if you're constantly thinking forward, and you're a truth teller, right? Our young people tell the truth, right? Those alarm bells are ringing, and the church is really poised, as Chris, you mentioned, really poised to, that's us. That's what we do, is we respond to these things. And so really, really looking forward to this continued work to bring Methodism into young people's spaces and let them lead. I think that's the key piece. They need to get a chance to lead. Speaking of young people leading, I want to shift it over to Sherry and Taylor. Now, I have that video ready to go. Do you want to introduce yourselves first a little and just talk for a minute or so, and then I can run that video? Or would you want me to start it off with the video?
Start off with the video, please.
Start off with the video. Okay, then I'm going to share my screen, and here we are.
We are Earth Stewards. I'm the Reverend Sherry Smith from Vermont. I'm passionate about connecting people to God, nature, and art.
I'm Isaiah, and I'm also from Vermont. And one of the struggles my family has faced is moving. And so what I learned from that is not to work against nature, or to find ways to help nature and make the best decisions.
I'm Taylor, and I am also from Vermont. And the reason I am taking part in this is I love nature.
Our project has 3 distinct communities.
The first one is our local churches. And our local churches have done some things to help the environment, but churches everywhere could do more.
Number 2, the Green Mountain District. At the district level, we could employ more opportunities for environmental stewardship and sustainability.
Number 3, New England Annual Conference is made up of Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and part of Connecticut.
Problem facing local churches is not knowing what they could or should do about sustainability.
The urgent problem facing the Green Mountain District is how do we share resources about environmental stewardship?
The problem facing the annual conference is overconsumption of disposable material.
Earth stewards will use the arts to enhance understanding of environmental stewardship and sustainability at the local church, district, and annual conference levels. We will lead virtual vacation Bible schools focused on art and the environment. We will create public service announcements about environmental stewardship and sustainability. We will address the problems through awareness and education, development of resources, and outlets of creative expression.
Milestone number 1 is summer 2021. Plan and lead a vacation Bible school in the Green Mountain District around art and the environment, and also create, send, and analyze a survey to churches about which languages are spoken there in their wider community to learn about which languages we should make our public service announcements in.
Number 2, summer and fall of 2021. Create 5 or more public service announcements that can be used in churches and organizations.
Milestone number 3, fall 2021, winter 2022. Network and plan for a larger virtual vacation Bible school for the summer of 2022 and develop other multimedia resources. Milestone number 4, summer of 2022, lead a virtual vacation Bible school focused on art and the environment with multiple tracks based on interests and age groupings with a mixture of live and pre-recorded sessions. In Genesis 1 and 2, God created. In this project, we are creating a healthier world.
During our project, we will strive to build relationships with communities of color.
We will create resources in different languages to honor the ethnic diversity of our conference.
We will address systemic change with regard to racial injustice and environmental justice through education and awareness. To help us, please reach out to the youth who are passionate about the environment in your communities, churches, and annual conferences to help us create public service announcements. Additionally, we would like to know what resources you would like for your families and local churches. We are planning to offer many resources in multiple languages. Let us know what languages would be helpful.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So yes, I really grateful to Sherry and Taylor and Isaiah for putting that together. And I want to go ahead and turn it over to you, Sherry and Taylor.
So that was the video that we submitted at the end of our Earth Keepers project during our training was an online training in the spring of 2021. And so some of those we have lived into and others we have not yet lived into, as is the case with life. But I would like Taylor to actually speak about why he wanted to be a trained Earth Keeper. And Isaiah and Taylor are the youngest commissioned Earth Keepers. They were 12 and 13 when they went through the training.
The reason I wanted to be an Earth Keeper was so that I could help stop climate change. That was the big part of it. Because if global warming keeps going, like we're gonna end up, there's gonna be more water on the planet than there should be. A lot of places are gonna start flooding.
Can you speak a little bit about the virtual vacation Bible school that you and Isaiah led for preschoolers and young adults? I mean, it's preschoolers and even children that were slightly younger than that.
Well, we did a lot of like different types of crafts you can do for like for really little, so like 2-3 years old, like crafts like so that 2-year-olds could do. And we did like some story time that on like animals. We did some animal story time.
So Taylor and Isaiah, along with several other youth and young adults from throughout the New England Annual Conference, offered a virtual vacation Bible study where they led all of the sessions. There was art, there was nature, there was Bible storytelling, there were prayers and songs that were shared. And it was an absolutely phenomenal experience, but they felt that it was important for them to share their love of God and creation and to provide a learning opportunity for children that were younger than they were.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything else you wanted to say about that?
No, I think that about sums it up.
So I had this wonderful opportunity to speak with, at that time, I think it was William, you were there as well, and Victoria Wingell, who is a forest activist. She goes out and she saves forests, which is like amazing. And I asked Victoria, what is it that you would hope for? So, there they are in the street marching and talking about how they walk past churches on these marches. And what is it you would hope for? And she said, I would hope that they would join us. That's what she said. And Taylor, I'm going to ask you that same question. When it comes to, taking a look around you at the world and what's going on and how people are engaging, what would you hope for from your church and the conference, the wider faith community? What would you hope for?
So that for people to listen and actually work together to stop climate change, like everybody just coming together and stopping climate change before it gets out of hand. Because if we don't do something soon, it's going to get to the point where we can't stop it. No matter what we do, it's not going to stop.
That's fantastic. If you were to ask each of us to take one step, is there something that you would ask each of us to do today?
Use stuff that's reusable and use more reusable stuff rather than single-use items. Just stop buying single-use items, because they're just going to end up polluting the environment.
Okay, so I don't know. How do we feel about making that pledge today? We will work on repenting of single-use items and really continue. And I know a lot of us are already working on that. So Taylor, I am definitely on board with that, and really, really grateful for that as an opportunity to live into your call for making sure that we actually deal with what's in front of us. Sherry, do you want to say, we just got a minute, but what was it like working with young people and organizing as support to them, right? To support them. I think sometimes we don't know how to support young people. What would you say is a way that we could support young people?
Listen to what they have to say and let them be the leaders, because they are so passionate and, want to make the world a better place. And you just need to listen to what they have to say and help to guide them and journey with them along the way.
Amen. So, and I hear what you said echoed in what William had said is let them lead, stand alongside them. And then what Chris has said about this is who we are. This is United Methodism. This is Methodism. This is Wesley's inheritance. As children of Wesley, we inherit this very type of thing. So That's wonderful. So thank you so much for being here and sharing that video. I want to bring it back to Chris now, and Chris is going to offer us some resources, local churches. How do we live that out? We already know that single-use plastics, that's us at the grocery store making those choices. But in the churches and other things, how do we let youth lead and listen to them? And Chris, I'm turning it back over your way.
For sure. I just want to voice that I am so grateful for youth voices being able to be included in our time today as well. And the observations are just so right on. The challenge that I think is out there for local churches in engaging both youth and young adults, and I think I heard this from William as well, is that there's not a lot of familiarity there. There's not a lot of relationship. Sometimes the scariest thing that a young person might do would be to cross the threshold of the front doors of a church. That is assuming you can tell where the front door is, because a ton of our churches are designed so badly that like you're not even sure how to get in the building in the first place. But there's this desire for connection and for listening that's genuinely important. And one of the pieces that we developed specifically related to climate justice and climate care, that Ken Sloan and I developed as a part of our Earth Day resources that came from UMC Discipleship last year, was an activity for young people to do an eco survey of their church. And I can pull up the link and make sure I can post that in chat and get it shared in the post-event notes as well. I did hear, the voice from Sherry and Taylor, saying sometimes local churches just don't even know where to start, right? Like when we talk about ecological justice or being climate friendly or those kind of things, it's such a big nebulous term that it's hard to dial in on what are the specific things that we can do. So we published an activity for a youth ministry or a young adult ministry to partner up with the trustees at the church, to build some relationships between the people that are supposed to be caring for the building, right? Along with youth that might be interested in ways to help the church be more efficient in the way that it stays open or the way that it operates. So we've got a checklist of things to be able to look at, right? Like what are the efficiency levels of the light bulbs that are being used? Talk to the folks that are working in the service areas and making sure that the air conditioning or heating units for the church are well maintained. How often do those get looked at? How do the filters get changed? If the church has landscaping of some kind, what does our yard care routine look like? What are we using? How much water are we using? Is there water waste in the building? If we share meals as a part of our ministries, are we using washable and reusable dishes and materials? Do we invite people to come with a mess kit if we're going to share a meal and then bring that home to wash on their own? Or do we build dishwashing into any of the meals that we offer? Or are we still using disposable stuff, right? Or maybe a middle ground looking at compostable things. What does our church, look like in terms of composting, recycling, any of those kinds of things? Honestly, from where William is in California, I've spent some time in San Francisco and with some congregations there. And in municipalities and counties where there are specific requirements, right, for how you deal with waste and composting and recycling, churches and other organizations have to follow along with the laws that are set there. What gets really challenging, I think, for local churches and for young people trying to dial in on those things to make a difference is if they're in a context and in a community where there's not guidance from the city, there's not guidance from local, waste companies or anything like that, they need to be able to find examples and small steps that they can start to take that add up to very, very big things. Okay. And so when we're talking specifically related to things that local churches can do, that's one of the places that I would start. Bigger picture stuff, right? I think I mentioned also in my part that in part because of COVID and in part because of the structure itself, young adults and youth are just getting less and less familiar with the structures that the church uses to make decisions, right? And it's a really interesting opportunity that we have going into General Conference of 2024 to lean into who we are as a connectional church. and helping young people become aware of the connectional network that's out there that can make a difference on a large scale. So, really it's both and kind of stuff. There's the things that we can do individually. There's the things that we can do corporately at the local church. And then look at our connection and the proposals that are going towards General Conference in 2024 and helping young people get familiar with the proposals that are out there that have to do with what the investments of the United Methodist Church look like, or how we might encourage divestment from those, less eco-friendly or less justice-based organizations where the United Methodist Church invests its money. We can make a tremendous difference on that front, right? We can also look at the leadership structures and how young people get to be able to bring legislation to General Conference, right? How can we help young people become familiar with their districts, with their conferences, with their delegations that are going there? Knowing that there's only so many representative spots to General Conference, it's important to be able to build relationships between young people and those representatives who really are speaking into the now and the future of the church. One of the great challenges, and we don't just see it in the church, right? We see it in a lot of political organizations as well, are people who are willing to get out of the way. And that's a big ask. That's a hard ask. But we have to be able to not only build bridges, but provide opportunities and seats at the table where young people can learn by practicing their faith and learn by practicing making decisions. And it's a tough one, especially with where we're going to in General Conference these days. But building familiarity with those resources is a huge deal. If you were to go to umcyoungpeople.org, that website does have some links to the work on the Division on Ministries with Young People as well. And that is the body that kind of operates denomination-wide in terms of being able to advocate and create resources, but also opportunities to amplify the voices of young people in the church. And I would encourage folks to be able to get familiar with that, because after General Conference in 2024, that's the thing that triggers being able to aim new people and name new people to that group as well. So the Division on Ministries with Young People will start to have, a new body that gets organized in the fall of next year. And one of the other pieces I'll say before I stop talking is I've got some specific discipleship related links that I can stick in there for sure. They're not necessarily clearly related to creation justice, but I do think they're worth sharing. Last point on being able to be part of the connectional system as well. One of the other things that we do through UMC Young People is we put together a free agent pool of young people who are willing to serve on the various boards and agencies of the general agencies of the United Methodist Church. All of the 13 agencies have written rules that say, we want young people's voices as a part of our boards. Often they don't know how to find them. So one of the things that we do is to create a Google form to be able to list out what folks are interested in and provide an on-ramp for them to be in leadership opportunities in the connectional system at that level.
Awesome. Yes, I would really, really encourage that. Chris is absolutely right. As a pastor, in the book of discipline, our book for the church, it says that you shall put young people on these boards from the local church up. That's the word shall. That's not if you can find them or where are they or whatever. It's so if you're a young person, you can feel empowered by that word and say, hey, it says right here that you should do this and you will do this. So hi, add me to the conversation. And believe it or not, I hope you will feel so welcomed and that people will be overjoyed to have your voice, because that's been my experience is people are really, really overjoyed to have and share and listen to young people. What we need to do that is listen with empowerment. That's the next step. It's one thing to listen and nod. It's another thing to listen to empower. And so that's what I'm hoping. That's what I'm hearing. Chris, awesome resources. Thank you. Thank you. I am now going to turn it over. So we did, because we ran a little late, we kind of absorbed our Q&A part, but you're going to have a chance to get into a breakout room. So if you have a question, and I've noticed there's some good ones in the chat, jump into that breakout room. You get to choose which, and I'm going to actually turn it over to Kathy, because Kathy's going to tell you all this. You don't need to hear it from me. Wonderful. Thank you all so much. And Kathy, you're up.
And thank you, Rashinda, for your leadership. And I know you're heading to something important next. So there are 3 groups, one with Chris, one with William, and one with Sherry and Taylor. And we invite you to pick the one that you are feeling interested in joining. You can also like come out and go back into a different one if you feel like being a butterfly and moving around. But there's certainly opportunities for you to go into deeper conversation. And so I'm going to open those rooms, and you can do that right now and join one of those groups and enjoy the conversation. Introduce yourselves, share the ideas that you have, your questions, and just get to know each other, because that's what this cafe is all about. So invite you to spend some time in conversation. Yeah, no, these small conversations tend to go faster than you think they are, but we hope you had some good opportunities to get to know each other better and to explore each other's interests and passions, and to see what more might be done with those relationships. Is there anyone that has something they'd like to share from the breakout group, that just something that came up, or that either a question or a resource or an idea that you'd like to offer back up to the rest of the group?
Well, Taylor and Sherry said that there's some curriculum for Sunday school for youth Sunday schools with Earth Keepers, and that's one thing that we were lacking in my church. So may I check out that?
Yes, I believe I know about that as well. Sherry, do you have a link for that, or are you gonna? Oh, you're muted too. So there.
It's the curriculum that Crystal created for part of her Earth Keeper training, along with her mother, the Harmony curriculum for gardening. But then there's also the one of the folks in United Methodist Camping and Retreat Ministry wrote the How to Be a Climate Hero book, which I think would be a great resource to use and go through that together as like a youth group or a Sunday school class. So Kathy, if you don't have those links, I can get those to you.
Trying to think, and there were other resources in the September newsletter as well, some other curriculum ideas. So we're just trying to continue to grow that, so that Clark, you and others no longer have to, look for something or create something new, because they're starting to be out there. That's great that you're wanting to do that. Anything else that came up that you'd like to share?
So we finished our breakout. Chris was talking about how there's sort of a drop off between children's ministries and youth ministries, and talking about having the youth ministers really involved with the children's program, so that there's sort of that natural bridge to go from one to the next, which I thought was a great idea. And I would love to see more of that done in our congregation.
I know I am mulling over the idea that Chris mentioned, that they are a repository for names of people who would like to be part of groups. And I know that the Creation Justice Movement is not necessarily one of those official boards and agencies with boards and so forth. But if there are folks that are joining that survey, filling out that survey, that have a passion about creation justice, please let them know about us. We would love to find a space that meets their passions and that allows them to lead and participate and come alongside others who are absolutely on this same journey. So hope we can continue to find other ways to do those kind of collaborative actions. I know that there will be a summary of this in addition to the recording, and the chat has been saved of all of those links that will be also shared. I just again would point out the September newsletter that was shared, that has lots of links, and including many of the ones from the Board of Discipleship that Chris and Ken shared. And I think we're time for us to close, and Chris has very generously offered to bring us out with prayer. So I'll turn it over to Chris.
Lucky for you all, this gets to be a short prayer as well, because my next Zoom starts in 4 minutes. So let's pray. Lord, thank you so much for your presence in our meeting this morning. My prayer always is that as we go about our daily lives, we're able to feel your presence in the decisions that we make, in the world that you created, that you called us to care for. I lift up the ministries of each and every person in our Zoom today, and thank you for their leadership, for their presence in their communities, and for their vision for being able to make this world a little bit more like the heaven that you would have it to be. Please strengthen us, equip us, empower us to be able to be present, to see the needs of those around us, and to be your hands and feet in this world and for this world. In your name we pray. Amen.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for who joined us today. Have a lovely rest of your day.
Thanks all.